Sterling Cross had the city in a chokehold, violent, wealthy, and utterly untouchable. But there was one terrifying secret that not even his closest captains knew. Every night, the most powerful man in the city screamed. No sleep, no peace, no relief. Just hours of guttural agony that echoed through the halls of his mansion, terrifying the staff and bringing his grandmother to tears. Doctors called it a degenerative nerve disease. Rivals called it weakness. But they were all wrong. That evening, he lay thrashing on his bed, drenched in sweat, as his new maid stood in the doorway. She didn't run like the others. She was quiet, sharp-eyed, and dangerously observant. She watched him claw at his thigh, her gaze locking onto something no one else had noticed. She stepped closer, ignoring his roar to get out. With trembling hands, she reached toward the hem of his trousers, the forbidden zone for any servant, and pulled out something thin, something sharp, something hidden in the fabric itself. Sterling froze. The agony that had plagued him for months vanished in a heartbeat. And in that silence, the Mafia boss realized that the woman standing over him hadn't just fixed his suit, she had saved his life. Stay with me until the end, because the tiny object she found wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt, and the person who put it there was the last person Sterling suspected. Now, let's go back to the beginning. To the outside world, Sterling Cross was a monster. He owned the shipping yards, the politicians, and the skyline. Men twice his age lowered their eyes when he entered a room. He had built an empire on a reputation of steel and invincibility. But inside the Cross estate, the Iron King was breaking. While his enemies assumed he was plotting takeovers in his penthouse, the truth was far more pathetic. Sterling was being tortured in his own skin. For 6 months, a mysterious burning fire would ignite in his leg, driving him to the brink of insanity. He had fired top neurologists, he had threatened surgeons, he had taken enough painkillers to sedate a horse, but the pain always returned, precise and agonizing, the moment he tried to be the boss. The Cross Mansion sat on a cliff edge, a fortress of gray stone and modern glass. It should have been a palace, but lately it felt like a haunted house. The screams began at sundown. The staff moved through the corridors like frightened mice, terrified of triggering the boss's temper. "Keep your head down," the head housekeeper whispered to the new girl. "Do your work, don't look him in the eye, and for the love of God, if you hear him screaming, you run the other way." Eulalia Vance arrived on a Tuesday, carrying nothing but a small bag and a resume that didn't quite make sense. She was striking, dark skin against the stark white of her uniform, with eyes that didn't just look, they assessed. Unlike the other maids who flinched at shadows, Eulalia moved with the steady grace of someone who had seen hard times and survived them. She wasn't there to cower, she was there to work. She started in the laundry room, pressing shirts with military precision, then the library. Finally, she was assigned to the master suite. The instructions were clear. Clean, don't touch the wardrobe, get out before he comes back. Eulalia nodded, absorbing the fear in the house. She could smell the antiseptic scent of doctors who had come and gone, failing to cure the master. She saw the grandmother, as Zipporah, weeping softly in the hallway, clutching a rosary. Eulalia entered the master bedroom. It was a disaster zone. Lamps overturned, sheets tangled, the aftermath of a man fighting an invisible war. She began to tidy, her movements efficient. She picked up a lint roller and moved toward the chair where Sterling's clothes were piled. And that's when Sterling walked in. He wasn't wearing the mask of the Mafia Don. He was pale, limping heavily, dragging his left leg as if it were dead weight. He saw Eulalia holding his jacket, and his eyes went black with rage. He hated being seen like this, weak, broken. "Get out!" he bellowed, grabbing a glass and hurling it past her. Eulalia flinched, but she didn't flee. She froze. Her eyes didn't look at his angry face. They dropped to his leg, specifically to the navy trousers he was wearing, the bespoke Italian wool that cost more than her yearly salary. She saw the way he favored the leg. She saw the microscopic ripple in the fabric along the inseam. "Get out!" he snarled, reaching for his hip, perhaps for a weapon, perhaps just to steady himself. But Eulalia stepped forward. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, knowing that touching him could mean death. But her eyes narrowed, her seamstress instincts taking over. She didn't see a sick man. She saw a bad stitch. "It's not your leg, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling but certain. Sterling stopped, confused by her audacity. "What?" "The pain," she pointed her shaking finger at his thigh. "It's not you. It's the suit." The corridors of the Cross estate were wide, cold, and echoing, built to make anyone walking them feel small. Eulalia moved in silence, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound against the obsidian marble. To the other maids, this was just a hallway to be cleaned, a surface to be wiped. To Eulalia, it was a map of neglect. She noticed the slight grime on the brass sconces that hadn't been polished in weeks, the microscopic fray on the velvet drapes where the sunlight hit them too harshly. Years spent bent over a sewing machine in the garment district had rewired her brain. She didn't just see objects. She saw tension, threads, and breaking points. She knew that if a seam was pulled too tight, it would eventually snap. And this house was pulled very, very tight. She turned the corner toward the linen closet and nearly collided with a small, trembling figure. It was an older woman, wrapped in a black shawl that swallowed her frail frame. Her silver hair was pulled back severe and tight, but her eyes were red-rimmed, the skin beneath them bruised with exhaustion. Zipporah Cross, the matriarch, the only person Sterling Cross loved, according to the kitchen gossip, and the only one who dared to cry for him. Eulalia stepped back and bowed her head, clutching the stack of fresh towels against her chest to hide the sudden hammering of her heart. "Forgive me, ma'am. I didn't see you." Zipporah didn't scold her. She didn't even seem to register the apology. She reached out, her hand skeletal and cold, gripping Eulalia's forearm with surprising strength. The old woman smelled of rose water and old books, a scent that felt out of place in this mausoleum of modern violence. "You are the new one," she rasped. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "The one they sent for the upstairs rooms." "Yes, ma'am. Eulalia." The old woman stared at her, searching for something in Eulalia's face. It was an uncomfortable, piercing scrutiny. "You have steady hands," Zipporah murmured, almost to herself, watching Eulalia's grip on the towels. Then her expression hardened. The grief in her eyes was replaced by a sharp, terrifying urgency. "Listen to me, girl. My grandson, he is suffering. The devil is eating his legs and the doctors are useless fools." She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that chilled Eulalia's blood. "But you must not pity him. Pity makes him angry, and when he is angry, he is not my grandson. He is a wolf caught in a trap." Eulalia nodded slowly, her breath hitching. She wanted to pull away, but Zipporah's grip tightened. "Do your work invisible," Zipporah commanded. "Clean the sweat from his sheets. Bring him his water, but do not speak unless spoken to. And whatever you do, do not look him in the eye. If he sees you watching his pain, he will destroy you." Zipporah released her abruptly and drifted away into the shadows of the West Wing, leaving Eulalia alone in the cold hall. She looked down at the towels in her arms, realizing she had squeezed them so hard her knuckles had turned white. The library was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and impending violence. 3 men sat in the high-backed leather chairs, their postures stiff, their eyes darting nervously toward the man behind the mahogany desk. Sterling Cross looked every inch the kingpin, impeccable in a charcoal gray 3-piece suit, his dark hair slicked back, his expression unreadable. But Eulalia, moving silently across the Persian rug with a silver tea service, saw the cracks in the porcelain. She kept her eyes lowered, focusing on the steam rising from the spout of the teapot.
Don't look him in the eye, Zipporah had warned. So Eulalia looked at his hands. They were white-knuckled, gripping the edge of the desk as if the wood were the only thing keeping him upright. The shipment from the docks was light. I was told the union rep was handled, Sterling said. His voice was a low rumble, controlled, but strained. It was, boss, one of the captains stammered, a burly man who looked like he could snap a baseball bat in half, but was currently sweating through his collar. It's just the new customs regulations. We need time. Sterling didn't answer immediately. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, cutting a track through the faint sheen on his skin. Eulalia placed a cup on the coaster near his right hand. He didn't acknowledge her. He didn't even blink. But as she turned to retreat, she saw it. His hand left the desk. It didn't go for his gun, and it didn't go for his glass. It dropped to his right thigh. It was a quick, jagged movement. He rubbed the fabric of his trousers right along the inner seam about 6 inches above the knee. It wasn't the slow, kneading motion of someone massaging a cramp. It was a scratch, a frantic, desperate attempt to dislodge something. Eulalia paused by the bookcase, feigning an adjustment to a stack of magazines. She watched his reflection in the glass of the cabinet. Time is a luxury I don't have, Sterling gritted out, his teeth clenched so hard his jaw muscle jumped. He rubbed the spot again, harder this time. The expensive gray wool bunched under his fingers. He shifted his weight in the chair, a subtle wince flickering across his face before he masked it with a scowl. It was the same movement she had seen yesterday when he wore the navy pinstripe, the exact same location. The captains exchanged nervous glances, assuming his foul mood was directed at their incompetence. They didn't see the sweat soaking through his shirt collar. They didn't see a man in pain. They saw a predator preparing to strike. But Eulalia saw the pattern. Pain didn't operate on a schedule, but clothes did. He only scratched when he sat. He only flinched when the fabric pulled tight against that specific muscle. It wasn't a nerve dying inside him. It was something attacking him from the outside. The sound of rushing water from the ensuite bathroom was Eulalia's ticking clock. Steam drifted from under the heavy oak door, carrying the scent of sandalwood and expensive soap. Sterling was occupied, and for the first time in days, the master suite was unguarded. Eulalia didn't hesitate. She crossed the room, her footsteps swallowed by the plush carpet, and pushed open the double doors to the walk-in wardrobe. It wasn't a closet. It was a sanctuary to vanity. Rows of recessed lighting illuminated racks of suits, color-coded from charcoal to midnight blue. The air smelled of cedar and crisp linen. To anyone else, it was just a display of wealth. To Eulalia, it was a crime scene. She moved quickly to the section holding the newest arrivals. Her fingers, roughened from years of needlework, brushed against the fabrics. Super 150s wool, cashmere blends, vicuña. These were garments constructed by masters, designed to make a man look like a god. She pulled the gray suit he had worn earlier off the rack. It was heavy, the drape perfect. She turned it inside out, bringing the trousers close to her face, squinting in the dim light. At first glance, it was flawless. The lining was silk, the hem invisible. But Eulalia knew how to look past the surface. She ran her thumb along the inseam of the right leg, the spot where she had seen him scratching. She stopped. The thread here was different. On the left leg, the stitching was a standard, flexible serge, meant to move with the body. But on the right leg, about 6 inches up from the knee, the thread felt stiff, taut. It didn't give. She grabbed a navy suit from the back of the rack, an older one, worn before the screaming started. She checked the inseam. Soft, pliable, normal. She went back to the new gray suit. She pressed her fingertip against the stiff section of the seam. It wasn't just the thread. There was a microscopic ridge buried deep within the fold of the fabric, something hard and slender that had been sewn in with terrifying precision. It was invisible to the eye, hidden between the layers of wool and silk, but to the touch, it was undeniable. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a manufacturing error. A tailor of this caliber didn't make mistakes. You didn't accidentally use the wrong tension on a single 3-inch strip of a single leg. She checked the next suit, the black tuxedo. There it was again, the same stiff ridge in the right thigh. She checked a third. Same result. The water in the bathroom shut off abruptly. The silence that followed crashed into the room like a wave. Eulalia shoved the hangers back into place, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern. Someone was turning Sterling Cross's armor into an Iron Maiden. Signor Ricci arrived the following afternoon with the air of a visiting dignitary. He was a small, bird-like man with silver hair and a tape measure draped around his neck like a stole. He carried a leather satchel that looked older than Eulalia herself. "Giovanni, my old friend," Sterling greeted him, his voice warmer than Eulalia had ever heard it. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, favoring his right leg, but he forced a smile. "You're the only one who can make me look human these days." "You are too kind, Mr. Cross," Ricci replied, bowing slightly. "A new cut for the season? Something with a bit more structure?" Eulalia was tucked into the corner of the room, ostensibly polishing the brass handles of the highboy dresser, but her eyes were fixed on the mirror, watching the reflection of the two men. Sterling stood up, wincing as his weight shifted. "Just make sure the trousers are comfortable, Giovanni. My leg, it's been giving me hell." Of course, Ricci murmured, dropping to his knees. He pulled a pincushion from his pocket. Perhaps a slightly wider fit in the thigh to allow for swelling? "Do whatever you have to do," Sterling said, placing a heavy hand on the tailor's shoulder. "I trust you. You've been dressing me for 10 years. You know my body better than I do." Eulalia saw Ricci flinch. It was subtle, a tiny spasm in his jaw, but she saw it. The tailor began to measure the inseam. His hands, usually steady as stone, were trembling. The yellow tape measure fluttered against the dark fabric of Sterling's slacks. Ricci wasn't just measuring, he was sweating. A thin sheen of moisture had broken out on his upper lip, despite the room being cool. He worked quickly. Too quickly. He barely touched the right leg, hovering the tape over the fabric rather than pressing it against the skin. He was terrified. "Is everything all right, Giovanni?" Sterling asked, looking down. "You're shaking." Ricci froze. For a second, the room was dead silent. Eulalia gripped her polishing cloth, holding her breath. "Just low blood sugar, Mr. Cross," stammered Ricci, forcing a laugh that sounded like dry wood cracking. "Old age is catching up to me. I should retire soon." "Nonsense," Sterling said, clapping him on the back, nearly knocking the little man over. "You'll die with a needle in your hand, my friend. I won't let anyone else touch my suits." The irony was so sharp it almost made Eulalia gasp. Sterling was declaring his loyalty to the very hand that was poisoning him. Ricci stood up, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, his eyes darting toward the door as if looking for an escape route. He wasn't a craftsman proud of his work. He was a man with a gun to his head, praying his masterpiece didn't kill him before he could leave the room. Eulalia found Zipporah in the small private chapel at the end of the east wing. The old woman was kneeling before a statue of the Virgin, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The air was thick with the smell of beeswax candles and despair. "Ma'am," Eulalia whispered, kneeling beside her, "please, you have to listen to me." Zipporah looked up, her eyes glassy and distant. "He is dying, child. My beautiful boy is rotting from the inside out, and God does not answer." "It's not God, and it's not sickness," Eulalia urged, her voice low and desperate. "I checked the suits, the new ones from Signor Ricci. There is something inside the seams. He is being poisoned, ma'am. The tailor is hurting him." Zipporah recoiled as if Eulalia had slapped her. "Giovanni, he held Sterling at his baptism. Do not speak such madness." She waved a trembling hand, dismissing the very idea. You are a maid, not a detective. Go back to your work before you insult this family further." Defeated, Eulalia left the chapel. She knew she had one card left to play, and it was the most dangerous one. She found Sterling in his study. He was slumped in his leather chair, a bottle of whiskey open on the desk, his leg propped up on an ottoman. His face was gray, slick with sweat, his eyes squeezed shut against the throbbing agony. He looked less like a kingpin and more like a wounded animal waiting for the end. Eulalia didn't knock. She walked straight to the desk. "Sir!" Sterling's eyes snapped open. They were bloodshot and wild. "I didn't ring for you." "I know," she said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron to hide their shaking. "I know why you're in pain. It's not your nerves. It's your clothes." Sterling stared at her, a slow, dangerous heat rising in his gaze. "What did you say?" "The tailor," she pushed on, breathless. "There is something sewn into the inseam of your trousers. I felt it. Every time you sit, it digs into you. You have to let me show you." "Enough!" Sterling roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. The whiskey bottle jumped, liquid sloshing over the rim. He struggled to sit up, his face contorted with humiliation. To him, this wasn't help, it was mockery. A servant girl telling him his wardrobe was attacking him? It was absurd. It was insulting. "You think I'm a fool?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You think because I'm sick, I'm stupid? Giovanni Ricci is a brother to me, and you are a nobody who folds towels." "I am trying to save your life," Eulalia pleaded, taking a step back as he lurched to his feet. "You are trying my patience," Sterling snarled. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get out of my sight. If I see you in this room again, you won't just be fired, you'll be buried. Do you understand?" Eulalia fled the room, the heavy door slamming shut behind her like a gunshot, leaving Sterling alone with his pain and his pride. The screaming started at 2 a.m. It wasn't the usual rhythmic groaning that the staff had grown accustomed to. This was a shriek of pure, white-hot delirium. It tore through the silence of the East Wing, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of a body hitting the floor. Eulalia was awake instantly. She threw her robe over her nightdress and ran into the corridor. Chaos had erupted. Guards were shouting, their flashlights slicing through the dark. Zipporah was wailing. At the center of the storm, Sterling Cross lay collapsed on the hallway carpet outside his bedroom, his face pressed against the marble, his hands clawing at the empty air. He was convulsing. "Get the doctor!" Zipporah screamed, clutching her chest. "No time," a guard shouted, hoisting Sterling's dead weight by the shoulders. "Get him to the bed." Eulalia pressed herself against the wall as the men dragged the thrashing boss back into his suite. She saw his face as he passed, eyes rolled back, teeth bared, sweat soaked his silk pajamas. He looked possessed. She knew what was happening. The toxins had accumulated. The swelling he had complained to the tailor wasn't swelling, it was his body rejecting the poison. If he put those trousers on one more time, or the residue on his skin wasn't stopped, his heart would give out. The guards dumped him onto the mattress. Zipporah was sobbing by the door, too frail to enter the violence of the room. "Everyone out," Sterling gasped, a moment of lucid rage breaking through the pain. "Get out." The guards hesitated, then retreated, eager to escape the spectacle of their invincible leader reduced to this. They ushered Zipporah away, leaving the door slightly ajar. Eulalia stood in the shadows of the hall. This was it. The house was distracted, the guards were posted at the perimeter, not the bedroom door. She ran back to her room and grabbed her small sewing kit. From it, she pulled a pair of silver embroidery scissors, sharp as a scalpel. She slipped into the master bedroom. The room smelled of sickness and copper. Sterling was tangled in the sheets, drifting in and out of consciousness. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the curtains. Eulalia approached the bed. Her heart beat so hard it hurt her throat. She wasn't just breaking the rules, she was committing a capital offense. She spotted the gray trousers thrown carelessly over the valet chair, the ones he had worn all day. She didn't go for them. She needed to show him the source, but she couldn't wake him to talk. He wouldn't listen. She moved to the bed. Sterling groaned, his head trashing to the side. "Forgive me," she whispered. She reached for the trousers on the chair, bringing them to the bedside lamp. She turned on the light. Sterling's eyes snapped open. He moved faster than a dying man should. In a blur of motion, he lunged from the pillows, his hand locking around Eulalia's throat. He slammed her back against the nightstand, the lamp rattling dangerously. "Assassin!" he rasped, his pupils dilated, seeing enemies that weren't there. His grip was iron. Eulalia clawed at his wrist, her vision spotting. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. She had the scissors in her right hand. She could stab him. She could save herself. Instead, she dropped her hand to the trousers she was still clutching in her left hand. With her last ounce of oxygen, she jammed the scissors into the inseam of the right leg and ripped. The sound of tearing fabric was loud in the quiet room. Sterling blinked, confused by the sound, his grip loosening just a fraction. Eulalia gasped for air, coughing, and shook the torn fabric violently. From the ruined hem, a small, dark object slid out and clattered onto the glass top of the nightstand. It was a needle. 2 inches long, black-tipped, and wicked. Sterling froze. He looked at the needle. Then he looked at Eulalia, who was gasping for breath, rubbing her bruised throat. The silence that followed was louder than the screams. The needle lay on the glass nightstand, an innocent-looking sliver of metal that had nearly toppled an empire. Sterling stared at it, his chest heaving. The adrenaline of the attack was fading, replaced by a cold, clarifying horror. He didn't look at Eulalia, who was slumped against the wall, massaging the red marks forming on her neck. He picked up the phone. "Get Dr. Vane in here, now, and tell him to bring the toxicology kit." 10 minutes later, the room was silent, except for the clinking of glass vials. Dr. Vane, a man who had stitched up more bullet holes than the city hospital, held the needle under a magnifying lamp. He ran a swab over the black tip and dropped the sample into a clear solution. The liquid turned a violent, murky green. "It's not just a needle, Sterling," Vane said, his voice grim. "It's a delivery system. The tip is coated in a concentrated neurotoxin, slow-acting, absorbs through the skin, probably derived from pufferfish or some synthetic variant. It doesn't kill you instantly, it mimics nerve degeneration. It drives you mad with pain before it shuts down your heart." Sterling sat on the edge of the bed, the ruined trousers still clutched in his hand. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't a disease. It wasn't bad luck. It was a sentence. Every time he had sat down for a meeting, every time he had crossed his legs in his office, the needle had pricked him. A microscopic dose, day after day. The scratching wasn't irritation. It was the poison entering his blood. And the tailor, Giovanni, the man who shared wine at his table, had measured the inseam to ensure the needle hit the femoral nerve exactly. "They weren't trying to kill me," Sterling whispered, the rage beginning to boil under his skin, cold and lethal. He slowly lifted his head. Eulalia was still standing by the heavy velvet drapes, trying to make herself invisible. She looked terrified, expecting retribution for destroying his suit, for entering his room, for existing. Sterling looked at her. Really looked at her. For years, he had relied on men with guns and degrees. He had surrounded himself with experts, and every single one of them had missed it. The doctors saw symptoms, the guards saw threats, the captains saw weakness. Only the maid saw the truth. He looked at the bruise on her neck, the mark of his own hand. Shame, a rare and bitter taste, filled his mouth. He had tried to kill the only person in the world who was actually fighting for him. "You knew," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Eulalia swallowed hard, her voice raspy. "I saw the stitch, sir. It was tight." Sterling stood up. The pain in his leg was still there, throbbing, but the fear was gone. The monster was no longer in his head. It was real, it had a name, and it could be killed. "Leave us," Sterling ordered the doctor, his eyes never leaving Eulalia. When the door clicked shut, the most dangerous man in the city lowered his head to the woman who cleaned his floors. The look in his eyes was no longer the wild glare of a dying beast. It was the terrifying, intense focus of a man who had just found a weapon he didn't know he had. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eulalia, sir. Eulalia," he repeated, testing the weight of it. "You have excellent eyes. Do not look away from me again." The morning sun flooded the fitting room, washing the oak panels in deceptive warmth. Sterling stood before the trifold mirror, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, older ones from the back of the closet. He looked restored. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by the terrifying stillness of a predator lying in wait. Signor Ricci arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, clutching his bag like a shield. "Mr. Cross!" Ricci exclaimed, his voice jumping an octave. "You look well, very well." "I feel reborn, Giovanni," Sterling said, turning slowly to face the little man. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes remained flat and dead. "The swelling has gone down completely. It seems your adjustments were exactly what I needed." Ricci let out a breath he had clearly been holding since he parked his car. "I am overjoyed to hear it. I told you a little extra room in the phi makes all the difference." "It does," Sterling agreed, stepping closer. He towered over the tailor. "But there is one small detail, a minor irritation I found in the lining. I thought you should see it." Ricci froze. "A defect? Impossible. My work is flawless." "I know," Sterling purred. "That's why I was so surprised." He turned his head slightly toward the double doors. "Eulalia, bring the alteration." The doors opened. Eulalia walked in. She wasn't wearing her apron. She moved with a new kind of gravity, her chin held high, carrying a silver serving platter usually reserved for the finest crystal. She walked past the tailor, whose eyes widened as he recognized the maid who had been polishing the furniture just days before. Eulalia stopped in front of Ricci. She didn't look at him. She looked at Sterling, waiting for the command. "Show him," Sterling said softly. Eulalia lifted the silver cloche. There was no tea, no letter, no refreshments. Sitting alone on the polished silver surface was the needle. Its black tip glistened under the chandelier light, innocent and lethal. Ricci made a sound like a dying engine, a choked, strangled gasp. He stumbled back, dropping his bag. "Sterling, please! They forced me! They threatened my shop!" "You poisoned me for 6 months," Sterling said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You watched me scream. You patted my shoulder and told me it was stress while you sewed death into my clothes." "I had no choice," Ricci sobbed, falling to his knees, grasping at Sterling's hem. Sterling didn't move. He simply looked down at the man he had trusted for a decade. "There is always a choice, Giovanni. You just made the wrong one." He nodded to the shadows in the corner of the room. 2 guards stepped forward, their movements silent and efficient. They hoisted the weeping tailor by his arms. "Take him to the basement," Sterling ordered, turning back to the mirror to adjust his cuffs. "And call the cleaner. I want this room sterilized." As the screams of the tailor faded down the hallway, Sterling met Eulalia's eyes in the reflection of the mirror. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't looked away. She stood holding the empty platter, a silent accomplice to his justice. It fits perfectly now. 30 days of silence had transformed the Cross estate. The screams that once haunted the corridors were gone, replaced by the hum of efficiency and the quiet restoration of power. The heavy drapes were pulled back, letting sunlight hit the marble floors for the first time in a year. Sterling Cross sat behind his desk, not as a dying man, but as a king restored to his throne. He was clean-shaven, the jagged lines of pain erased from his face, leaving only the sharp, handsome angles of a man who owned the city. He was reviewing the contracts for the Western Territory he had reclaimed the moment he stopped fighting his own body. He pressed the intercom button. "Send her in." Eulalia didn't knock. She entered with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide in the shadows. She wore a new uniform, crisper, higher quality, chosen by Zipporah herself, but her hands were the same, steady, rough, and capable. "You asked for me, sir?" Sterling stood up. He wasn't wearing a jacket. He was in a white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and simple trousers. He moved around the desk with a fluid, predatory grace that made the air in the room shift. There was no limp, no hesitation. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the sandalwood soap and the faint metallic scent of ink. "I have a meeting with the commission tomorrow," Sterling said, his voice low and intimate. "I need a suit, something that commands respect, something bulletproof in a manner of speaking." Eulalia clasped her hands. "Signor Ricci is unavailable. Shall I call the backup tailor from Milan?" "No," Sterling said. He held her gaze, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I don't want a stranger's hands on me. I don't want anyone in this room who I have to watch." He reached out and picked up a yellow measuring tape from his desk, the one Ricci had left behind. He held it out to her. "I need a new tailor, Eulalia. One who sees what others miss. One I can trust with my life." Eulalia looked at the tape, then up at him. The request hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He wasn't asking for clothes. He was asking for a partner. He was inviting her into the inner circle, the only place where he allowed himself to be vulnerable. Slowly, she reached out and took the tape. Her fingers brushed against his, and a spark of electricity, sharp and sudden, jumped between them. "Raise your arms, sir," she whispered. Sterling obeyed, lifting his arms in surrender, watching her with a look of possessive awe as she stepped into his space. She circled the tape around his chest, pulling it taut against his heart. For the first time, the most dangerous man in the city was perfectly safe.